Hello everybody and welcome to another video. So today we're going to be playing a little bit of Chinese whispers based on information that people on the internet heard from the devs at PAX East. And also I wanted to talk a little bit about the patch that was due out today but ultimately has been delayed. So the footage in the background will be one of the longest Vine Wraths I've done in a long period of time. Around two different builds here. Number one is kind of the classic Xerky Staff Ellie. You'll see that towards the end, which I kind of enjoy running at Vine Wrath because you get everyone pumping out the 25 might. So I feel like all those little power infusions that I went for, I sort of get most use out of them there. Plus it's a level 80 zone, so there's that little bit of funness there. But also mainly you're going to be seeing me run a healing elementalist. I do show off the whole build in the footage, and the idea here is it's actually somewhat useful because you can run between the two lanes that are currently active. You know, one lane will be in fighting the Vine Wrath champion itself, while you can run between the other two lanes using Fiery Greatsword, Signet of Air for mobility, and when you see one of these siege carriers gets low, you can run over, pump its health up massively, and then nip back down to the other lane. So it's an interesting idea. If one of the siege depots runs out of supply, then you tend to find the siege carriers sort of get stalled. If players are bad, they don't know how to refill the supply, then they can start getting knock-locked by Terragriffs and stuff and taking massive damage, and that's where you come in. If you can keep a lot of them alive, then obviously people get more chests and stuff at the end. So it's fun. I don't know how well the footage really shows that off because there was a big struggle on this particular Vine Wrath, but hey, at least it's some vague use for healing. I'm still a little bit sad that, you know, a full glass Guardian can just run the book and heal them up for 50% health with no investment whatsoever, while I'm running around doing so much stuff to spec into healing and I can barely come close to that. But hey, they have a long cooldown on that. So moving on, let's talk about the patch. Basically, what was due out for today, guys? Tuesday, of course, ArenaNet's conventional patch day. It has been 2 weeks since our last patch. Well, there was going to be an update that would give us all these juicy new camera changes. I am infinitely curious about ArenaNet right now when they're rolling into Heart of Thorns, thinking to themselves, what do we hold off for the expansion? What do we wait with? Well, I guess, you know, something like the camera changes, they're not going to limit that to people who only have Heart of Thorns. That would be a bit cruel. Say, hey, you want this quality of life? You don't want your camera to spaz out? Buy the expansion. You know, that's just crazy. So if they have it ready around about now, then I guess they just want to throw it out. This is not a full-on feature pack, but the idea was that that was coming this Tuesday. They also mentioned vaguely that the stability changes we have heard about, which I'll describe in a second, would be coming sooner than we think. And then I believe it's been pretty much confirmed now, they were also due out this Tuesday. But these changes have now been delayed. They've been postponed. This is the first time we've seen ArenaNet do this for a long time. The red post, I believe, came from Gale on the forums. Simply says, hey, look, we need some additional time for QA testing. Which of these two features, and I'm sure there'll be some other stuff lumped in also with these changes here, not just the stability change, not just the camera, probably some other things also. Which of these is it they are QA testing, I wonder? Because obviously the camera thing, the FOV thing, the FOV slide, the collision detection, even first person, these are kind of big things. They could easily have been going wrong somewhere, so maybe that's what they're looking at. But also the stability change is going to be huge for the game, and I wouldn't be surprised to hear that this is more of sort of a balance perspective thing, and this is what they're looking at. So I'll describe the change in full now, and we'll segue this into some of the Chinese whispers we'll get to play about vague information we've heard from PAX East that delivers a little bit more on what's happening with stability. So we know that in the expansion, break bars are going to be a thing. This is the change to Defiance that's primarily aimed at PvE encounters and the way we sort of CC bosses, how control works in PvE. We've also heard that players will get break bars, and this is probably going to be on our big transform skills, like Lich Form, for example. But we've also heard of a change to stability. So stability right now is a boon. Some things give it to you for a very long period of time. There's actually, even though it is so widely in use in the game and you see it so frequently, there actually aren't too many skills that provide it, and it's supposed to be one of the hardest boons to have access to. And so what this does is while you have stability on you, you are immune to CC. All CCs will fail on you until it times out, or someone strips it, such as by using steel on a thief, or one of the many strip methods both the Necromancer and the Mesmer also have. For a lot of matchups, a lot of classes, when we look at stability in PvP, stability is just kind of like this hard counter for a period of time to a lot of your abilities. You know, you just can't CC. If you're a warrior, you have very little chance of actually stripping this boon unless you're absolutely mental and you've gone for a sigil. skill that does something like that. So, it's kind of this big hard counter. There's a little bit of play to it, however, on certain classes that can boon strip, and you really just go on defensives until stability runs down, and then you start popping your CCs again. Now, what I just said was kind of a competitive PvP example. In World versus World, we tend to find melee trains are a thing right now. There is obviously tons of CC out there, but one well-timed pop of stability, even if it only lasts something like 8 seconds, perhaps even shorter, can be enough for your entire Zerg to, you know, smash their way through a million static fields, a million fear walls, everything, and, you know, really get in the enemy's face, go ham, and you kind of have this clashing mentality between Zerg fights at the moment. And so ArenaNet have decided that they don't really like this. Now, one thing we've heard from a player who was talking to a dev at PAX was that the primary motivation, supposedly, for a change to stability was from World versus World. They didn't necessarily like how this was working in World versus World, and they wanted a bit of a change. So now, instead of stability being a boon that stacks duration, i.e. if you already have stability and then a Guardian pops stand your ground and you get even more, it will just increase in its duration. Instead, now it stacks in intensity like might, so you'll end up with 2 stacks of stability, 3 stacks of stabilities, potentially, I suppose, all the way up to 25 stacks of stability. I'm not sure we've had any comment on that. And so the idea here is now a stack of stability doesn't make you immune to all CCs, it just makes you immune to the next one. Stability is basically going to become what we saw Defiant was on bosses. And so now all those different stability skills that used to exist in Guild Wars 2 and would just give you 1 stack of stability, which was enough to get through everything, now they'll give you like a numeric. So we hadn't heard any examples until some of these recent dev comments that are coming from players. So take everything I say here with a grain of salt. The reason I'm calling this a Chinese whispers thing is because someone told someone else something who then told us, and now I'm telling you, and details and implementation are going to get lost. Do not take this as 100% fact, but they gave a couple of examples. They gave one of the Mesmer mantras, that's Mantra of Concentration. This thing currently will give you a little bit of stability for a while. Well, now this gives you 2 stacks. So this means you will be able to eat the next 2 big CCs that come your way. We've heard comments that somewhere around the 2 to 5 level will be where most of those skills will be. I think we heard that Dolyak Signet on the Warrior, if you pop this, it currently just gives you a reasonable duration of stability. I believe it will now give you something like 5 stability. And so now there will be a little bit more differentiation between different skills. You know, currently there's not too much difference between popping Balanced Stance versus popping Dolyak Signet, and now maybe because this boon stacks in intensity, we can see some difference there. You even look at Mantra of Concentration, right, with the Mesmer. Now you might be incentivized to pop both, or even 3 charges if you trade for it, straight away, so that you get lots and lots and lots of stacks. Now, they said this was primarily about World versus World. Let's look at how this will affect World versus World, probably in a big way. A lot of people are saying straight away that it's going to kill melee train stuff, unless like you're very, very organized about it. I see it as potentially improving the Zerg battle experience from my very limited understanding of World versus World, simply because I like the idea that under the current system, you could have, say, 10 Elementalist static fields go down at some kind of a choke, and the Zerg just pops a single stability and runs through them. They are all completely useless. While now, under the new system, people are going to want to stack up as much of that as possible, and they're going to like be grinding their way through these static fields. The stacks getting ripped down as they slowly slug through, and it means that there is actual use in piling these things together and syncing them all up as a large unit. So when you physically see, oh my god, there's a million static fields over there, you're actually intimidated by it, and kind of the visual representation of this massive wall that is in front of you is also mechanically represented, and you kind of know, right, maybe I shouldn't go that way. I don't think anyone can fully predict how World versus World on the large scale kind of fights is going to go after this change, but hopefully ArenaNet have done their homework on that particular topic, especially if like that's the main reason they were thinking about the change in the first place, right? And because this is such a complicated thing, maybe this, rather than the camera stuff, is why we are seeing today's patch be a little bit delayed, though who can say for sure. We did also hear an example about Rampagers 1, and so Rampagers 1 is probably the best skill in terms of like getting stability, like really long duration stability that exists right now. You know, it's not one of these skills that feels like super elite, but it's a relatively low cooldown, incredibly long duration, chance for rangers to be able to give themselves stability, and especially in competitive PvP, I find this to be one one of the most annoying stability skills out there. So they describe the change here. Under the new system, obviously this can't just give like a ridiculous duration on one stability. How lame is that going to be? Someone's just going to throw one tiny little thing away and then it's stripped. But at the same time, does it really work if they give out 20 stacks of stability? See, the way we know the game works right now, especially with stuff like boon conversion, is if you have 25 might on you and I run over as a necromancer and I pop Well of Corruption on you, I don't remove one stack of might at a time, I remove the entire thing. So mechanically, you know, even a ranger that gets 25 stacks of stability from Rampages 1 is still incredibly hard countered by just this one pop of a stability stripping skill. Now, you can make the argument that that's exactly the situation we're in right now, but it wouldn't seem that ArenaNet like this, so the way that they've changed Rampages 1 at least is that it will pulse multiple stacks of stability, like 2 to 3, I believe maybe even they set up to 5 stacks of stability recurringly. So during Rampages 1, you have this amount of stacks of stability, very, very short duration, and then a couple of seconds later it will pulse back on you. And so you can still be CC'd if people coordinate a lot of CC on you all at once. You can break through it. There is play to it. There's even play to battle against it now on classes that don't have access to Boon Strip, but rather just CCs to shred their way through. But also, it will continue to have some kind of effect throughout the full duration of your elite, and it won't be completely unstoppable. So I do like the idea. I also don't know whether they've accounted for this or not, but this also means that if you were to like go for boon duration for whatever reason on your ranger, because that recurring stability that pulses is lasting longer, it actually means it now has a higher intensity too. Like you may be maintaining 6 stacks of stability rather than just 5 or even 4 throughout your elite because you went boon duration. So it actually makes, in a very small, interesting, subtle way, that a more interesting stat to go for. There are little quirks as well mechanically, like the fact that applying stability to yourself is not actually a stun break. So if a necromancer somehow converted your stability into fear and made you run backwards, and then it pulsed the stab back on you, you are still feared and running away. So it's not like this totally incredibly overpowered thing, and I like the idea. A lot of people heard this and then immediately thought, oh, this will be how all those kinds of elites work. Remember though that Rampages 1 isn't necessarily like a full-on transform. It won't change your skill bar. It's not on the same level as stuff like Plague and Lich. It's not even necessarily on the same level as like Dagger Storm for the Thief. So will we see this change hit all those other things too? Probably. See, now here's where it gets interesting. They're doing the stability change now, but then we also hear about break bars later. So what, are we going to have like a weird version of, say, Lich form with the new stability system for a little while here, and then we're going to change again on those skills to become break bars? Or were break bars never planned for those abilities altogether? We're going to be kind of in a weird place between after this patch goes live and up until when Heart of Thorns actually releases, and perhaps we could see some changes, even further changes to some more of these skills. But yeah, so it's going to be an interesting change, very unpredictable for World vs. World. Maybe I'll start having a look more at it. If it ends up that, you know, these big Zerg-style fights are a lot more engaging and appealing after this, then absolutely, maybe I could see myself spending some more time in the game type. Obviously, with any big change, I don't think necessarily these sigils are going to be any good. The TP kind of exploded. Sigils of impact are now worth, like, tons because people have speculatively bought them. These people were obviously then assuming that the new stability change means CC will be easier to inflict after the update. But, you know, some kind of a change like that means maybe someone's going to make a lot of money, someone's not going to make very much money at all. So back to some Chinese whispers type stuff. I guess that's really all to say with the stability change. We'll see how it goes when it comes in the game. There has been no mention, by the way, of when this patch eventually will come. We could be looking at next Tuesday, or maybe they'll just push it out in a couple of days when they feel confident with what's going on. So as you guys know, PAX East has been going on. A lot of people got the opportunity to speak to developers, to even play the demo for themselves, and you know, hearsay has come out. We saw a little bit of this even at PAX South when people were talking about the after party and things that certain developers had said. I have kind of been scouring it. There's a lot of it, especially over on Reddit lately. What I have seen, at least, that was interesting to me and I think could be very much useful information to us is first the idea. Everyone's obviously asking about specializations. No one's got any names. No one's got any unrevealed information yet. But the Druid has come up a few times. The developers are apparently saying, look, pets are still going to be involved with, like, the druid profession mechanic. So what we saw in that trailer where we saw a druid with a pet, I'm absolutely confident that was on purpose so that we won't speculate that there'll be like a petless class. They will still have a pet. It will be involved. It just, I guess, depends on how involved it will be. I still very much like the idea of the druid being able to go into their pet's mind somehow and control it. This is something we've seen in other games that would be bizarre and awesome and interesting for Guild Wars 2 to go in that kind of direction. So they have said that. There's also been information thrown out that I think is very, very, very likely that each specialization will probably get a week dedicated to it. So like next week we would learn everything there is to know about the Druid. Then the week after that we'd learn everything about the Chronomancer, about, you know, the Spectre, whatever these other classes are going to be, these other specializations. This would seem kind of in line for a lot of reasons. It's what ArenaNet did going into the Guild Wars 2's release. Initially, you know, each class ended up getting revealed on a different week, and they weren't back-to-back-to-back weeks, but this was what they did, and it really gave people a chance to look at each of these classes, see how they shine. And also, if you think about the 9-week period that it would take to go through all 9 of the classes in the game, and then sort of just some other arbitrary milestones and things they want to hit, like beta and so forth, it points to the release being like somewhere around the end of summer, and this would be my prediction. I think it would be pretty cool if they ended up having their first expansion release on like the 3-year anniversary right after, on the same day as like launch. So launch was the head start on the 25th, and then official launch on the 28th. And oh, what do you know? Well, the 25th of August is a Tuesday. So I don't know. It's perhaps a little bit flimsy, but looking at the information that logically they have yet to give us about Heart of Thorns, that kind of makes sense. And I'm not sad to see if each specialization does get a week each. You know, I wouldn't ever imagine them just releasing all the specializations at once. Someone was talking to John Peters, okay, and talking specifically about the idea of specializations that only get offhands. And yeah, in some ways, I guess this sounds upsetting to people that their class may only get an offhand. You know, a two-handed weapon is 5 whole new skills for someone to learn, potentially opens up an entirely new playstyle for that class, and can then, you know, even snowball into lots of new interesting cool traits and stuff. So it does sound very exciting, and people are wondering, what about these classes that only get just 2 skills because all they get is an offhand? I would make the argument, first of all, that though I do personally feel like a 5-weapon skill would be more exciting than just a 2-weapon, do consider that the offhand, they are the last skills on your bar, right? And these tend to be the most impactful ones. These tend to be the skills that make the most difference in fights. And yes, they also have the highest cooldown, so it's like, oh, I'm only getting 2 skills, and these skills I'm barely ever going to be using just because they've got such big cooldowns. At least they can have big effects on the way that you're playing, okay? And so maybe we don't want to undervalue the idea of offhands too much. But this question was brought up to John Peters, who said that he made it sound as though people who do only get offhands with specializations will at least have something just as good, you know, or these 2 weapons will be equivalent to somehow the class in general, the specialization in general, perhaps through its unique profession mechanics, through this new offhands ability to synergize with other one-handed weapons, will make it feel just as cool, okay? And he seemed very confident, supposedly, again, Chinese whispers, that these classes will be just as good, and these specializations will feel just as powerful as, you know, say the engineer who's getting a hammer. So that's exciting, though obviously no specifics makes it hard to speculate. Colin was asked, as many people have asked, about the Zaitan fight, how terrible it was, and will it ever get a rework. This I found interesting. Not in his response, I wasn't really expecting them to rework Zaitan, but he basically said, look, it's not going to get fixed, and the reason why is because people would rather play totally new stuff than go through overhauls of old stuff. And I get what he's saying. I'm very scared of this kind of philosophy, though, and I hope that ArenaNet aren't embracing this idea like on a whole game-wide level. I get it, Zaitan, in the grand scheme of the end game, in the grand scheme of everything in Guild Wars 2, is really only a small facet. Story-wise, it should be a very important facet, but it's gameplay, it's not. And so I get why they wouldn't necessarily want to revamp this. But I hope that they don't take this stance with everything else. You know, we saw that they were maybe keen on revamping the other dragons. You know, like they did this with Gw2, and it seemed for a while like maybe they would go and do the Shatterer. Maybe they would do the Claw of Jormag, and Gw2 was one of my favorite updates that's ever gone into the game. It's done more for Guild Wars 2's end game on like a large guild basis than most updates they've ever put out. It's a fantastic update, and one I'm a huge fan of, and I was always looking forward to them overhauling some of these other encounters that are out there in the game. And this now sounds to me like, you know, this is maybe something we won't see at all. I totally understand that they're going into Heart of Thorns and they should focus on the expansion itself, but I would like to hear at least at some point that they do still value overhauling these old areas, especially when it comes to these big boss fights. You know, in my opinion, if I ever worked for ArenaNet, my, like, dream stuff to do probably wouldn't be like, I wouldn't want to be the guy working on Heart of Thorns right now. I'd want to be looking at all these old encounters and making these boss fights better and working on new systems and gambits and stuff to improve the dungeon experience and all that kind of stuff. That's what really excites me. And so, you know, just this general philosophy, I hope they don't dive into too much. But yeah, no Zaitan rework, and at least they're being frank about the fact, hey, it wasn't a very good fight, but it's just not worth improving. We also heard from Colin that he is most excited for the engineer specialization. Also, someone was picking at the fact that he mentioned there would be a beta. Like, this is full-on speculation territory here, but it sounded like there'd only be an open beta. You know, maybe we'd have one weekend or something for Heart of Thorns instead of like 3, which we had for the actual base game. Who knows, though? That's going to be quite far away. We heard that Berserker Stance. This is the ability that currently makes you immune to conditions in game. As we know, Heart of Thorns is going to have a new boon in it called Resistance, which doesn't strip conditions off of you. It just means that they don't affect you. So let's say you have 25 bleed on you and fear on you. You then get resistance applied to you. You still have 25 bleed on you, you still have fear on you, but you stop running backwards and you stop taking damage. Then when resistance ends, you start running backwards again and you start bleeding down again. Unless, of course, during the duration of resistance, the fear ticked off of you because it was very short, for example. So resistance is coming in the game, and their idea could very well be that Berserker Stance, which currently just makes you immune to conditions, will instead apply resistance to you, right? Which makes sense, and also so that it can't be stripped and it's not necessarily nerfed by this change. It could be pulsing resistance onto you, similar to how we saw stability would pulse onto you with like Rampage's 1. People again were talking about build templates coming to the devs about this. This was actually confirmed officially in Colin's interview with Bog Otter, who asked about the build templates, and he said, look, this is a cool idea, but it's not something that's coming with Heart of Thorns. So we already knew that. That's at least not Chinese Whispers. And lastly, I would mention one final thing. This didn't necessarily come out of PAX East, it's just something I found. Another thing with today's update that I had missed was they're going to introduce a beta version of like being able to stream the client. So with Guild Wars 2 currently, if you're a new customer, if you're a new person that comes into the game, you have to download the whole damn thing and then you can go in and play. Well, now you'll be able to opt in after this patch if you add as a command line argument streaming, -streaming, I believe. It will allow you to get in the game and play it before you even have all of the files. So you'll only have to download a little bit, and then you can get in there, you can make a new character, you can play all the 1 to 15 zones, and then if you try to go to a map that you haven't downloaded yet, you can either just sit there and wait on the loading screen, or you can tell the game, okay, can you start downloading this in the background while I wander off and do other stuff. So it's a really cool feature, something we see in a lot of MMOs, something we saw a lot of in Guild Wars 1. Obviously they're moving into an expansion now, so this is something they have to start paying attention to, otherwise new people will come, going to have these massive downloads and maybe quit and decide they don't want to play the game even right there at the beginning just after purchase, and I'm sure they do leak a lot of customers like that. So yeah, that's going to be cool, and I'm going to try it out, I suppose, especially considering I'm getting a new PC soon. So thanks very much for watching, guys. This has been a bit of an update on what's going on right now. I'll let you know when we get more information about the patch. I hope you guys have a great day, and I guess I'll see you tomorrow.